The great crystal towers of Zentara stretched high into the purple sky like frozen lightning. The Galaxy Council had built their capital city to show their power, and it worked perfectly. Every alien species that saw these towers knew they were looking at the rulers of the galaxy. For 3,000 years, the Council had made all the important decisions about who lived, who died, and who got to keep their freedom. Council leader Vextar walked slowly across the polished floor of the main meeting hall. His 4 blue arms moved in careful patterns as he prepared for today's discussion. He was old, even by Council standards, and had seen the rise and fall of hundreds of civilizations. Today they would talk about a problem that seemed very small but kept getting bigger. The other Council members took their places around the massive circular table. Councillor Morden slithered into his seat, his tentacles curling with annoyance. He had been complaining about the same issue for months now, and nobody seemed to take him seriously. General Kickstar stomped in wearing his full battle armor. Even though there had been no real wars for centuries, Commander Yelnara floated above her chair, using the same gravity-controlled technology that kept their ships in space. Vextar raised one of his hands and the room became quiet. Every council member knew that when the leader spoke, everyone else listened. This was how things had always been done, and it worked perfectly. We have gathered today to discuss the situation in the Sol system. Vextar announced, his voice echoing off the crystal walls. The third planet continues to cause problems for our expansion. Plans Morden's tentacles writhed faster. I have been saying this for years, he said, his voice full of frustration. These humans refuse to follow our guidance, they ignore our messages, and they keep building new ships without asking for permission. What kind of primitive species thinks they can do whatever they want? The other council members made sounds that might have been laughter in their various languages. The idea that any species could challenge the council seemed funny to them. They had conquered star systems when these humans were still living in caves. They had energy, weapons that could turn entire planets into dust. They had ships so large that smaller species used them as space stations. But what can they really do? Asked General Kickstar, his armor, making clicking sounds as he moved. They have been space travelers. For less than 100 years. We have been ruling the galaxy for 30 times longer than that. Their weapons are primitive, their ships are slow, and their technology comes from studying our old equipment that we threw away. Commander Yelnara nodded in agreement. I have seen their so-called warships, she said with a tone that showed how little she thought of them. They use chemical rockets and metal projectiles like something from the ancient wars. Our shields can stop anything they have, and our weapons can destroy their entire fleet before they know we are there. Far away from this meeting, Captain Kang Daeho stood on the bridge of the Soul's Pride looking out at the stars through the main viewing screen. He did not know that powerful aliens were discussing his species like they were talking about annoying insects. He was focused on training his crew and testing their new ship. The Soul's Pride was the newest warship in the Earth Defense Force, and Captain Kang was proud of every bolt and wire in her construction. She was not the biggest ship humans had ever built, but she was definitely the smartest. The fusion engines could push her faster than any human ship before her, and the new navigation system could plot courses through space that would have been impossible just 10 years ago. Commander Park So-young walked up beside him, holding a data pad with the latest test results. Captain, she said with excitement in her voice, the experimental drive is working, better than we hoped. We can fold space without using any of the alien technology we found. The engineering team thinks we might be able to travel between star systems in days instead of months. Captain Kang smiled. This was good news. The aliens who had been watching Earth for decades always seemed surprised when humans developed new technology without their help. Maybe they thought humans were too stupid to figure things out on their own. They were about to learn how wrong they were. In his laboratory on Earth, Dr. Lee Minho was making discoveries that would change everything. He had been studying pieces of alien technology that human ships had found floating in space. Most people thought these were gifts or accidents, but Dr. Lee suspected they were something else entirely. As he examined the alien computer systems under his microscope, he noticed something strange. The technology was old, much older than it should be, if the aliens were still advancing their science. The computer chips looked like something humans might have built 50 years ago, and the power systems were actually less efficient than what Earth was using now. Dr. Lee ran more tests, and each one confirmed what he was starting to suspect. The aliens were not as advanced as they wanted everyone to believe. Their weapons used old energy principles, their ships relied on technology that had not improved in centuries, and their tactics seemed to be copied from ancient textbooks. He called his assistant, Dr. Kim Soo-jin, to look at his findings. Kim, she said, looking at the test results, these alien devices are not just old, they are practically ancient. Some of this technology is actually worse than what we have been developing. Dr. Lee nodded grimly. I think they have been using fear and reputation to control other species for so long that they stopped trying to actually improve themselves. They probably have not fought a real war in hundreds of years. Meanwhile, President Kim Ji-woo sat in her office, in the United Earth Government Building, reading reports from all over the solar system. Human colonies on Mars, Venus, and the outer planets were all reporting the same thing. Alien ships were watching them from a distance, but never getting too close. It was like they were studying humans but did not want to make direct contact. Her assistant brought her a message that had just arrived from deep space. The transmission was clearly alien in origin, and it was addressed to the leaders of Earth President. Kim activated the translation system and watched as the message played on her screen. An alien with blue skin and 4 arms appeared, speaking in a language that sounded like music mixed with machine noise. The translator converted his words into English. "We are the Galaxy Council," he said, his voice full of authority. "Your species will join our empire as a servant race. You will provide workers and soldiers for our greater good. Resistance is meaningless. Submit now and your suffering will be brief." The message ended and President Kim sat quietly for several minutes. She had expected this day would come eventually. Humans had found too much evidence that they were not alone in the universe, but she had hoped that first contact would be more friendly than this. She called an emergency meeting of Earth's military leaders and top scientists. Within hours, Admiral Song Woo-jin, Captain Kang Dae-ho, Dr. Lee Min-ho, and dozens of other important people were gathering in the secure conference room beneath the government building. President Kim played the alien message for everyone and watched their faces as they realized what it meant. Earth was being invited to become slaves in someone else's empire. The room was quiet for a long time, as everyone thought about what this would mean for humanity. Finally, Admiral Song spoke up. "Madam President," he said, his voice calm and steady. "What are your orders?" President Kim looked around the room at the faces of Earth's best and brightest. These were the people who had helped humanity reach for the stars, and they were not the kind of people who gave up easily. She thought about all the humans living throughout the solar system, building new homes and dreaming of new worlds. She smiled and asked the question that would change galactic history forever. What happens if we say no? Ambassador Quintal stood in his private chambers aboard the Council diplomatic ship, preparing for what he thought would be the easiest assignment of his long career. He had done this same task hundreds of times before arriving at a primitive world, delivering the Council's generous offer of servitude and watching the local leaders fall to their knees in grateful submission. The ritual was always the same. First, he would demonstrate the Council's superior technology by destroying something unimportant like a few satellites or an empty space station. Then the primitive species would realize how outmatched they were and beg to serve the Council in exchange for their lives. It was a dance that had been performed across the galaxy for thousands of years. Quintal adjusted his ceremonial robes and checked his translator device. The humans had built a space station in orbit around their third planet, and that would be the perfect place to meet their leaders. He expected the entire process to take less than an hour. Once the humans saw his escort ships, they would understand that resistance was impossible. The Council diplomatic fleet dropped out of hyperspace near Earth's orbital station with all the dramatic flair that Quintal could manage. 12 massive warships arranged themselves in a perfect formation around his smaller diplomatic vessel. Each ship was over a kilometer long and bristled with weapons that could level mountains. The site was designed to make primitive species lose hope before the talking even began. But when Ambassador Quintal's ship docked with the human station, he found something unexpected. Admiral Song Woo-jin was waiting for him with a full honor guard of human soldiers. The admiral looked calm and confident as if meeting alien ambassadors was something he did every day. The human soldiers stood at attention in their crisp uniforms, holding weapons that Quintal had never seen before. They did not look frightened or overwhelmed by his presence. Instead, they looked like they were ready for anything that might happen. "Welcome to Earth Station 1," Admiral Song said in perfect galactic standard language. "Your message said you wanted to meet with our leaders. I am here to listen to what you have to say." Quintal was surprised that the humans had learned the common galactic language so quickly. Most primitive species took years to master even basic communication. He decided this was probably a good sign that the humans were intelligent enough to be useful servants. "Your species has been chosen for a great honor," Quintal announced, his voice carrying the authority of 3,000 years of galactic rule. "The Galaxy Council has decided to accept humanity into our empire. You will serve as workers and soldiers, helping us maintain peace and order throughout the galaxy." He paused, waiting for the usual reaction of fear and submission. But Admiral Song just nodded politely as if he was listening to a weather report. "The Council is generous in its offer," Quintal continued. "We will provide you with basic technology and protection from other hostile species. In return, you will give us your complete obedience and dedicate your lives to serving our greater purpose." Admiral Song listened to the entire speech without interrupting. When the alien ambassador finished talking, the Admiral smiled and said words that no species had ever dared to speak to the Council before. "Thank you for your generous offer, Ambassador, but we must respectfully decline. Earth chooses to remain independent." The color of Quintal's skin shifted from blue to deep purple as shock and rage filled his mind. No species had ever refused the Council's offer in all of galactic history. The very idea was impossible. The thought that these primitive apes would dare to say no to beings who ruled the stars was beyond his understanding. Admiral Song noticed the color change and realized that the alien was becoming angry, but he did not seem worried. Instead, he touched a small device on his uniform and spoke quietly into it. "Yellow alert, all stations. This is Admiral Song." Throughout the solar system, human military personnel received the Admiral's signal and began implementing defensive plans that had been prepared for this exact moment. Lieutenant Colonel Yoon Hee-jin sat in the command center of the hidden defense platform, orbiting behind Earth's moon, watching her sensors as the alien escort ships began to power up their weapons. "You do not understand what you are refusing," Quintal said, his voice shaking with emotion. "No species has ever denied the Council's generous offer. The consequences of your foolishness will be severe." The alien ambassador signaled to his escort ships to begin the demonstration that had worked so well on other worlds. The Council warships charged their energy weapons and targeted several human communication satellites that were floating peacefully in space around Earth, but humans had been preparing for this moment ever since they first discovered evidence of alien life in the galaxy. Dr. Lee Min-ho's research had shown them that the Council's technology was old and predictable. Their energy weapons took time to charge, and their targeting systems were slow and inefficient. Lieutenant Colonel Yoon had studied every piece of alien technology that humans had ever found, and she knew exactly what the Council ships were about to do. She also knew that humans had developed weapons that the aliens had never seen before. The moment the alien ships began charging their weapons, Yoon activated Earth's hidden defense network. Railgun platforms that had been secretly built throughout the solar system came online and targeted the Council escort ships. The magnetic accelerators charged up in seconds and fired projectiles at incredible speeds. The alien shields that had protected Council ships for centuries were designed to stop energy weapons and explosive missiles. They had never been tested against solid metal projectiles traveling at significant fractions of the speed of light. The human railgun rounds punched through the alien shields like they were made of paper. In 30 seconds, 5 Council warships were reduced to floating debris. The remaining 7 ships found themselves under attack from weapons they could not see or understand. Human stealth fighters that had been hidden in the asteroid belt began hitting them with guided missiles while defense platforms fired from positions the aliens had never detected. Ambassador Quintal watched in horror as his mighty escort fleet was destroyed by weapons that seemed to come from nowhere. The humans had not just refused the Council's offer, They had demonstrated that they could back up their refusal with devastating force. The surviving council ships retreated in panic, carrying news that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization. Admiral Song allowed them to leave because he wanted them to tell their leaders exactly what had happened. Dr. Bai Tae-young led the recovery teams that collected the wreckage of the destroyed alien ships. What they found confirmed everything that Dr. Lee Min-ho had suspected. The Council's technology was not advanced. It was ancient. The alien weapons were designed to look impressive rather than be effective, and their ships were built more for intimidation than actual combat. The alien hulls were made of materials that looked strong but were actually brittle. Their energy weapons were powerful but slow, and their engines were inefficient designs that wasted enormous amounts of power. The Council had been ruling through fear and reputation for so long that they had forgotten how to build weapons for real warfare. Meanwhile, Captain Oh Min-soo received orders to take his exploration fleet beyond the solar system and see what else was out there. The human ships used their new space-folding technology to travel faster than any Council vessel could follow. What Captain Oh found in the nearby star systems amazed him. The galaxy was full of species that had been enslaved by the Council for hundreds or thousands of years. They lived in fear of their alien masters and worked constantly to produce resources that were shipped back to the Council's home worlds. But when these enslaved species saw human ships easily destroying Council patrol vessels, word began to spread that someone had finally stood up to the mighty Council. Some of the braver alien rebels began sending secret messages to the human ships asking if the rumors were true. On the agricultural world of Kepler 442b, a slave named Torkan watched human ships destroy a Council garrison in orbit around his planet. He had been born into slavery and had never known freedom, but seeing the Council's ships burning in space made him believe that change might be possible. Similar scenes played out across dozens of star systems as news of humanity's victory spread. The Council had ruled through fear for so long that many species had forgotten what it felt like to have hope. But watching humans fight back against impossible odds reminded them that resistance was possible. Back on Zentara Council, Leader Vextar received the reports from the surviving ships with growing disbelief. A primitive species had not only refused the Council's generous offer, but had actually defeated Council warships in battle. The very foundations of galactic order were crumbling. General Kickstar paced angrily around the Council chamber, his armor clanking with each step. "This cannot be allowed to continue," he growled. "If word spreads that the Council can be defeated, every slave species in the galaxy will begin to rebel." Commander Yelnara floated nervously above her chair. "We underestimated them," she admitted reluctantly. "Their weapons are more advanced than we thought, and their tactics are completely different from anything we have faced before." Vextar knew that the Council faced the greatest crisis in their long history. For 3,000 years they had ruled through fear and superior technology. Now a species they had dismissed as primitive had shown that the Council could. Council leader Vextar stood before the Great War Map in the deepest chambers of Zentara, watching as red lights marked the locations where rebellions were starting across the galaxy. The news of humanity's victory had spread faster than he thought possible, and now dozens of enslaved species were beginning to fight back against their Council masters. "This cannot continue," Vextar declared, his forearms gesturing angrily at the spreading chaos on the map. "If we do not crush these humans immediately, the entire galaxy will rise against us. We must show every species what happens when someone defies the Council war commander." Thexler stepped forward wearing the ancient battle armor of his ancestors. He was the greatest military leader the Council had produced in 5 centuries and had never lost a single battle. His fleet had conquered more worlds than any other commander in Council history. "Give me 200 ships," Thexler said, his voice filled with confidence, "and I will bring you the ashes of their home world. These humans think they are clever because they destroyed a few patrol vessels, but they have never faced the full might of the Council." Fleet General Kickstar nodded in agreement. The humans got lucky once, he growled. "But luck does not win wars against superior numbers and firepower. We will show them what real galactic warfare looks like." But far from the Council's crystal towers, Captain Nam Sung-ho was preparing for the battle he knew was coming. The human intelligence network had detected massive council fleet movements, and it was clear that the aliens were planning something big. The Sol system would soon face the largest invasion force in galactic history. Captain Nam stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Teal. Busan Thunder looking out at the human fleet assembled around him. 30 ships against 200 seemed like impossible odds, but Nam had studied every battle recording the humans had captured from council vessels. Major Choi Yuna, his tactical officer, had made a discovery that changed everything about how humans would fight this war. The council had been using the same battle formations and tactics for over 3,000 years. Their ancestors had developed a style of warfare that worked perfectly against primitive species, and they had never bothered to improve it. "Captain, they fight like they are still conquering Stone Age civilizations," Major Choi reported. "They form up in massive walls of ships and rely on their superior firepower to overwhelm their enemies. But they have no experience fighting opponents who can think creatively." The human fleet had been designed with a completely different philosophy. Engineer Commander Lim Jae-sung had equipped each ship with weapons that could adapt to changing battle conditions. Their kinetic missiles could change direction in flight. Their stealth fighters could become invisible to enemy sensors, and their quantum mines could attack from multiple dimensions at once. When War Commander Thexler arrived in the Sol system with his massive fleet, he expected to find the humans cowering behind their planetary defenses. Instead, he found something that made no sense at all. The human ships were scattered throughout the system with no apparent formation or battle plan. "This is not how civilized species fight wars," Thexler muttered to his bridge crew. "They have no discipline, no organization, and no understanding of proper military tactics. We will crush them like insects." The council fleet formed up in their traditional battle formation, a massive wall of 200 ships stretching across space like a moving mountain of metal and energy. Each ship was over a kilometer long and carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon. The sight had terrified enemies for thousands of years, but Captain Park Dong-hyun, who commanded the human vanguard, had studied this exact formation in the captured council tactical manuals. He knew that the alien wall formation was designed to intimidate enemies into surrender, not to fight opponents who refused to be intimidated. Instead of meeting the council, fleet head on the human ships did something that no enemy had ever tried before. They scattered in every direction like leaves, blown by the wind, then began attacking from angles that the council formation could not defend against. Wing Commander Seo Hyun-woo led squadrons of human fighters that danced between the massive council ships like deadly butterflies. The alien gunners had been trained to hit large, slow targets and had no idea how to fight small, fast opponents that moved in unpredictable patterns. Admiral Kang Soo-jin coordinated the entire battle from Earth's command center, watching as her carefully planned strategy unfolded exactly as she had hoped. The Council's mighty wall formation that had conquered 1,000 worlds became a death trap when facing enemies who attacked from every direction at once. The human pilots had been trained in the brutal warfare of Earth's history, where survival meant learning to adapt faster than your enemy could react. They used tactics that came from centuries of human conflict, combined with technology that the Council had never seen before. Captain Oh Min-soo commanded a squadron of human destroyers that appeared behind the Council fleet, using their experimental space-folding drives. The alien commanders had never faced enemies who could teleport across the battlefield, and suddenly found themselves under attack from directions they thought were safe. The battle raged for 6 hours as the massive Council fleet slowly crumbled under the relentless human assault. The aliens had superior numbers and firepower, but the humans had something far more valuable. They had learned to think like warriors instead of conquerors. Lieutenant Commander Kim Tae-ho led the final assault on War Commander Thexelor's flagship, using a tactic that would be studied in military academies for centuries. His small squadron of human corvettes attacked the massive Council dreadnought from below, where its weapons could not target them. The Council ship was designed to fight enemies that approached from the front or sides, like every other species had done for thousands of years. No one had ever thought to attack from underneath because no civilized species would use such an undignified tactic. War Commander Thexler watched in horror as his mighty flagship was crippled by opponents he could not even see. His centuries of military training had prepared him to fight honorable battles against honorable enemies. But these humans fought like wild animals with no respect for proper warfare, as his ship's systems failed around him. Thexler realized that the Council had made a terrible mistake. They had grown soft and predictable during their long reign of terror, while these humans had learned to fight for their very survival. The great Council fleet that had entered the Sol system with such confidence limped away in defeat. Leaving behind the wreckage of over 180 ships, War Commander Thexler escaped with only 12 vessels carrying the most devastating news in Council history. The humans had not just won another battle, they had completely destroyed the finest military force the Council possessed. They had taken the Council's best tactics, turned them inside out, and shown the entire galaxy that the mighty Council could be beaten by anyone willing to fight smart. Instead of fight fair, as news of the second great defeat spread across the galaxy, the rebellion that had started as whispers became a roar of defiance. Enslaved species that had never dared to dream of freedom began to believe that the impossible might actually be possible. On Zentara, Council leader Vexitar stared at the reports in disbelief. The humans had done more than win battles. They had shattered the myth of Council invincibility that had kept the galaxy in chains for 3,000 years. The age of fear was ending and the age of rebellion had begun. The news traveled faster than light itself across the galaxy, carried by secret rebel networks that had been hidden for centuries. Beings who had lived their entire lives as slaves suddenly dared to whisper words they had never spoken before. Freedom, independence, rebellion. The impossible had happened twice now, and hope was spreading like wildfire. On the mining world of Kepler 442b, deep underground where the sun never shined, slave leader Zormak received a message that changed everything. A human ship was approaching his world and wanted to talk. The very idea seemed impossible. The Council controlled all space travel, and no ship could reach Kepler 442b without their permission. Captain Kim Hyun-soo brought his cruiser, the Daigu's Hammer, out of hyperspace near the mining world and immediately found himself surrounded by Council patrol ships. But these were not the mighty warships that had once terrorized the galaxy. These were old vessels with skeleton crews that had been left behind to guard the least important worlds. The human ship's advanced stealth systems made it nearly invisible to the ancient Council sensors, and Captain Kim was able to slip past the patrols and establish contact with the underground rebel network. His message was simple and direct. Your people have shown us that the Council can bleed. Zormak transmitted from his hidden base deep in the planet's core. Will you help us win our freedom, Captain? Kim's response came without hesitation. Freedom is every being's right. We will fight beside you. The liberation of Kepler 442b became the template for dozens of similar operations across the galaxy. Human ships would arrive at enslaved worlds, provide weapons and tactical support to local rebels, and help them overthrow their Council oppressors. The pattern was always the same. The Council's garrison forces were unprepared for real warfare and crumbled quickly when faced with determined resistance. Colonel Jung Min-kyung led the liberation of the agricultural world Gliese 667c, where billions of harvest slaves had not seen natural sunlight in over 3 generations. The Council had built massive domed cities to house their workers, but had never bothered to give them windows. The sight of free beings emerging into daylight for the first time brought tears to the eyes of even the toughest human Marines. But the real shock came when Dr. Oh Yoon-ji made a discovery that changed everything she thought she knew about the Council. While examining captured alien technology in her laboratory, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The energy signatures were familiar, too familiar. She ran test after test, and each one confirmed what she was beginning to suspect. The Council's most advanced weapons were not alien inventions at all. They were based on human designs stolen from Earth's early space probes centuries ago. Dr. Oh called an emergency meeting with Earth's top scientists and military leaders. When she presented her findings, the room fell silent as everyone realized what this meant. They have been using our own technology against us, she announced, her voice shaking with anger. But they never understood the science behind it. They just copied the surface designs. Without learning the principles, this explained why human weapons were so effective against Council defenses. The aliens had built their shields and armor to stop their own weapons, which were really just crude copies of human technology. The original designers knew exactly how to defeat their own creations. Admiral Lee Sang-min was given command of the Human Expeditionary Force and sent to investigate Council activities in the Vega system. Intelligence reports suggested that something important was hidden there, something that the Council was desperate to protect. What Admiral Lee found there made his blood boil with rage. The Council had been conducting experiments on captured humans for decades, trying to understand what made Earth's people different from other species. They had built secret research facilities on remote worlds where they could work without being discovered. Commander Yu Ji-hoon led a battalion of Earth Marines in the assault on the prison facilities. What they found inside was worse than any nightmare. The Council had been treating humans like laboratory animals, testing their limits and studying their behavior. Children who had been taken from early human colonies were kept in isolation chambers while alien scientists monitored their psychological development. Elderly humans were subjected to medical experiments designed to understand how Earth's gravity and atmosphere had shaped human biology. Young adults were forced to fight in gladiator arenas. While Council nobles bet on the outcomes, the rescue operation saved 3,000 human prisoners, but the psychological impact on Earth's military was enormous. Every human soldier who saw the prison camps understood that this war was no longer about independence or freedom. This was about revenge against beings who had treated their people like animals. Lieutenant Kim So Young led her squad through the children's section of the prison complex and found horrors that would haunt her dreams. For years, alien scientists had been trying to determine if human children could be turned into loyal servants through psychological conditioning. The experiments had failed because human children were too stubborn and independent, but hundreds had died in the process. When footage of the prison camps reached Earth, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Every human colony in the solar system demanded to join the war effort. Civilian volunteers lined up at recruitment centers, and industrial facilities began working around the clock to produce weapons and ships. President Kim Ji-woo addressed the entire solar system in a broadcast that was heard on every human world and space station. "The Council has shown us their true nature," she said, her voice filled with controlled fury. "They do not see us as fellow intelligent beings, they see us as objects to be used and discarded. We will show them what happens when they underestimate human determination." The war that had started as a rebellion for independence became a crusade for justice. The galaxy watched in amazement as human forces struck deeper and deeper into Council territory, liberating enslaved species and destroying the infrastructure that had supported 3,000 years of tyranny. Dr. Bae Min-jung analyzed the data recovered from the prison facilities and made another disturbing discovery. The Council had not just been experimenting on humans. They had been conducting similar research on every species they had conquered, trying to find ways to make their slaves more obedient and productive. The genetic modification programs, the behavioral conditioning experiments, and the surgical procedures designed to make beings more suitable for specific types of work painted a picture of systematic cruelty that spanned millennia. The Council had turned slavery into a science and had been perfecting their techniques for thousands of years. Major Park Dong-soo led the investigation into the Council's historical records and found evidence of atrocities that shocked even hardened military personnel. Entire species had been modified beyond recognition, turned into living tools that existed only to serve their Council masters. Civilizations that had shown too much. Independence had been systematically destroyed and their survivors scattered across the galaxy. The rebellion that had started with humanity's refusal to submit became something much larger, a galactic uprising against the most evil empire in known history. Species that had been enemies for centuries put aside their differences to fight against their common oppressor. The Council's response was predictable and desperate. They began destroying their own research facilities rather than let them fall into rebel hands. They executed prisoners rather than risk them being rescued, and they started using weapons of mass destruction against their own former territories. But it was too late. The galaxy had seen what the Council really was beneath their claims of bringing order and civilization. They were revealed as monsters who had built their empire on the suffering of billions of innocent beings. Captain Lee Hyun-woo received reports from across the galaxy as more and more species joined the rebellion. The bird-like inhabitants of the Centauri system had seized control of their orbital factories. The aquatic peoples of the Procyon worlds had driven out their council overseers, and the insectoid colonies of the Vega system had declared their independence. Each victory made the next one easier as rebel forces captured council weapons and learned to use them against their former masters. The technology gap that had once seemed impossible to bridge was closing rapidly as freed species shared their knowledge and resources. The Council's 3,000-year reign of terror was crumbling, and everyone in the galaxy could see it. The beings who had once seemed too mighty to oppose were revealed as cowards who had grown weak from centuries of easy conquest. The final phase of the war was about to begin, and the Council would face an enemy unlike any they had ever encountered before. An alliance of free species led by humans who refused to give up no matter what the odds. The crystal towers of Zentara had stood for 3,000 years as symbols of the Council's eternal power, but now they trembled as massive explosions shook the planet's surface. The final battle of the Galactic War had begun, and the Council's capital world found itself under siege for the first time in its history. Fleet Admiral Park Ji-sung stood on the bridge of the super dreadnought Soul's Vengeance, watching as the combined human rebel armada dropped out of hyperspace around Zentara. 6,000 ships from 50 different species had come to witness the end of the galaxy's greatest tyranny. The Allied fleet was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before. Human ships flew alongside vessels from the bird-like Kepler worlds, whose pilots could see in multiple dimensions the aquatic Proxima, had contributed their underwater assault craft that could fight in any environment. And the insectoid Vega had brought living ships that could repair themselves during battle council. Leader Vextar gazed out from his command center at the largest space fleet in galactic history surrounding his world. He had called back every council ship from across the galaxy and assembled the last 2,000 vessels that still answered to his authority. These were the elite ships that had never known defeat, crewed by the descendants of the conquerors who had ruled. When humans were still discovering fire, General Cho Min-jun did not just command human forces, he led a coalition of beings who had all suffered under council rule. The freed slaves fought with desperate courage, knowing that defeat would mean a return to lives of misery and oppression. The former council subjects fought to prove they were worthy of the freedom they had been given. The battle began with the largest energy weapon exchange in galactic history. Millions of laser beams and particle streams lit up the darkness between the stars as 6,000 ships opened fire at once. The space around Zentara became a deadly light show that could be seen from neighboring star systems. Council leader Vextar watched from his command bunker as his mighty fleet engaged the rebel alliance using the same tactics that had worked for thousands of years. His ships formed into their traditional battle walls and began the systematic destruction of their enemies. But the rebels had learned from every previous battle, and they were not fighting like any enemy the Council had faced before. Captain Bei Su-hyun led the first assault wave in a maneuver that would be studied by military historians for centuries to come. Instead of attacking the Council's strongest positions, the human fleet targeted the communication relays and support ships that held the Council formation together. Like pulling threads from a tapestry, the entire Council battle line began to unravel as individual ships found themselves cut off from their commanders. The breakthrough came when Commander Lee Dae-young discovered the Council's ultimate weakness. Their command ships were all connected by an ancient communication network that had been designed when the Council trusted each other completely. The system had never been updated because no one had ever imagined that it might be turned against them. Major Kim Young-ho led the Human Cyber Warfare Division in the most important hacking operation in galactic history. Working with alien computer specialists from a dozen different species, they managed to penetrate the Council's communication network and take control of their command systems in the final moments of the battle. The Council's own ships began firing on each other as their targeting computers were reprogrammed by the rebel hackers. Vextar watched in horror as his carefully coordinated fleet descended into chaos, with warships destroying their own allies. The Council fleet that had entered the battle with perfect discipline and overwhelming firepower found itself completely helpless against an enemy that fought with methods they could not understand or counter. Vextar's 3,000-year empire was collapsing in a single day. Captain Park Min-soo led the final assault on the Council's command ship, bringing his squadron in close to disable the vessel's engines. The massive dreadnought that had been the symbol of Council power for centuries drifted helplessly in space as human Marines prepared to board. But the war did not end with a final battle or a dramatic surrender. Instead, it ended with something that no one expected. Council leader Vexitar sent a message to the rebel fleet that changed everything. "We surrender." He transmitted his voice filled with defeat and despair. The Council admits that we have been wrong. The galaxy belongs to those who love freedom, not those who love power. President Kim Ji-woo received the surrender message aboard her flagship, but she did not celebrate victory. Instead, she did something that surprised everyone in the galaxy. She offered to negotiate a peaceful end to the war. The final treaty was signed not on a battlefield, but in a conference room where representatives from every species in the galaxy came together to decide what would come next. The age of the Council was over, but the age of cooperation was just beginning. The crystal towers of Zentara were not destroyed but were converted into hospitals and schools, where former slaves could learn to read and write. The Council's vast fleets were broken up and distributed to the species that had built them. The research facilities where horrible experiments had been conducted were turned into memorials so that future generations would never forget what had happened. But the most important change was not visible in any building or monument. It was the change in how the galaxy thought about itself. For 3,000 years, beings had lived in fear of their masters and had never dared to dream of something better. Now they knew that freedom was possible, and that even the mightiest tyrants could be defeated by people who refused to give up. Admiral Song Woo-jin was chosen to lead the new Galactic Federation that replaced the Council. His first act was to establish the Universal Declaration of Rights, which guaranteed that no being would ever again be forced to live as a slave. Every species would have the right to govern itself and to seek happiness in its own way. Dr. Lee Min-ho was put in charge of the new Galactic Science Council, which would share technology freely among all species instead of hoarding it for the benefit of a few. The weapons of war were converted into tools of exploration, and the ships that had once carried armies now carried scientists and teachers. Captain Kang Dae-ho received a new assignment that would have seemed impossible just a few years before he was given command of the first integrated crew in galactic history, with humans and aliens working together as equals. His ship, the New Soul, was tasked with exploring the galaxy and making contact with species that had never been part of the Council's empire. The war had ended, but the real work was just beginning. Billions of beings who had lived their entire lives as slaves had to learn how to be free. Entire civilizations had to be rebuilt from scratch, and ancient wounds between species had to be healed. President Kim Ji-woo addressed the galaxy in a broadcast that reached every inhabited world. "The age of slavery is over," she announced, "but the age of freedom has just begun. We have proven that no tyrant is too mighty to oppose, and no dream of liberty is too bold to achieve." As the crystal towers of Zentara caught the light of their sun and reflected it across the galaxy in patterns of hope and renewal, billions of beings looked up at the stars and saw not the cold darkness of space, but the warm glow of infinite possibility. The Council that had once seemed eternal had fallen, and in its place rose something that had never existed. Before a galaxy where freedom was not a dream, but a reality where every being could reach for the stars and know that they had the right to touch them. The moment the Galaxy Council realized humanity was too mighty to ignore had become the moment. The galaxy realized that freedom was too precious to surrender. The age of fear was over and the age of hope had begun.